there was clearly a quid pro quo here, where Israel would agree to a ceasefire in exchange for free reign in the West Bank, as well as free reign to abandon the ceasefire whenever Israel so chooses it, right? Which is exactly what we've seen.
All right, so this was Dr. Zachariah Foster. He's a historian by training and not just any historian. He focuses on the Middle East and especially on Palestine. Zach earned his PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University back in 2017. The title of his dissertation, The Invention of Palestine. Yeah, I know it's provocative, but stick around and you will hear what he really meant with it. Now, just a quick note before we dive in. This conversation was recorded right before Israel resumed its bombing campaign in Gaza. But let's be honest, anyone who's been paying attention, especially viewers of this channel, knew that this so-called ceasefire was never the endgame. Israel wasn't negotiating for peace. They did a bargain so that Trump could have his inauguration PR stunt, and they used the time to trash the West Bank. So what we are seeing now is part of something far bigger, what many refer to as the push for a greater Israel, meaning settler expansion into Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon and Syria. And if that sounds like conspiracy talk to you, here's something you might want to consider. There's a document, an official one, leaked from Israel's own Ministry of Intelligence. It lays out in chilling detail how to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And no, I'm not paraphrasing here. That's the content. And it wasn't drafted after October the 7th. Yes, it surfaced just 6 days after, but that strongly suggests the plan was already on the shelf before the Hamas attacks even happened. We'll get to that in the interview, but if you want to read the document for yourself, we have linked it in the description. One last thing. Critical voices, like the ones you hear on this channel, are being actively silenced, shadow banned and deplatformed. Not in theory, not in some distant future, right now. You might not see it, you might not believe it, but I have the numbers and viewer feedback, like the ones you see now on your screen, to prove it. And I know it now from first-hand experience because my own Twitter account has been permanently suspended. Not for breaking any rules, not for spam, not for bots, but for challenging the wrong narratives and questioning the wrong interests. That's how this game is played today. Step outside the script and they shut you down. Not with a debate, not with facts, but with silence. So if you value sharp, unfiltered analysis, the kind that doesn't play by mainstream rules, do something about it. Subscribe, like and share this video. Every click makes it harder for them to erase these conversations. And if you really want to keep up with my work without censorship, join me on Substack. No algorithmic choke holes, no hidden filters, just raw, honest analysis. You can also find my podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Amazon. All the links are right below. Think about it. If we don't support independent voices, soon there won't be any left. Zach Foster, what a pleasure having you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And thanks so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Now, I'm not entirely sure you appreciate the comparison, but I came across a clip that I saw from you, and that was also the reason that I reached out. But it reminded me strikingly on Kenneth O'Keefe. Do you know him?
I'm not sure, no.
Kenneth O'Keefe is the Marine soldier who was on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla who, whilst they were shooting and killing 10 people from helicopter, disarmed 2 Israeli commandos with his bare hands. And he, in his style of presentation, this fire, this flame he has, reminded me of you. So I saw a clip from you. I think it was on TikTok, because I'm now officially banned. My Twitter account has been suspended, so I'm looking a bit more on Twitter.
Wow.
And that reminded me on you. Now, I have a little bit of information from here. So you are professor, if I see this right. You did your PhD at the Princeton University.
That's right.
That's right. And your dissertation title was The Invention of Palestine. Now, I could not imagine a better title. Tell us.
Well, in academic research, there is a genre of writing that I would call the invention of literature. Because as social scientists and as humanists, we've come to realize that all of these things like Israel, Palestine, Germany, France, so those would be geographical concepts, they don't exist in nature. They were invented by human beings. You cannot look into the soil of Germany and France and tell you, aha, the soil in Germany is of a certain type, whereas the soil in France is of a different type. No, a pedologist cannot tell you, if given a sample of soil, they cannot tell you whether or not that soil comes from Germany or France. That's not how nature works. In fact, nature itself is an invention. You have a book titled The Invention of Nature. You have a book titled The Invention of Science. Everything we've come to know, the invention of human rights, all of these concepts, certainly geographical concepts, countries, races, the invention of white people, the invention of black people, all these things are just invented by human beings. And so this is obviously the case with Palestine. You can't take a soil sample from Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Palestine and Egypt and tell you which soil is from which country. That's not how it works. Palestine is just a concept we invented and we gave it meaning. And so my dissertation, what it tries to do is it tries to explore the history and the evolution of this concept that human beings invented. What were its borders in history? Did people care about it in history? Did they use that name to describe this region in history? And if they did, what were its boundaries and its contours? And what did it mean to people? Did they care about it? Did they identify it? And thus, the second question that I ask in my dissertation is, when did people identify with Palestine? Did they ever call themselves Palestinians? If so, when and why? And those are the questions that I try to answer in my dissertation research.
Then my first question would, of course, be how would you respond to those who say there never was a historical Palestine?
Well, they're correct in the sense that there never has been any place called Palestine or Israel or Germany or Mexico or Argentina. These are all just invented places. So if their point is that all spaces and places in the world are invented, well, they're obviously correct about that. But oftentimes this rhetoric is used to try to undermine the Palestinians' connection to Palestine, right? That's why you'll hear Israel enthusiasts and Israel's apologists tell you, oh, there was no such thing as Palestine. They never called themselves Palestinians, right? Because they want you to think that the people who had been living in Palestine for centuries upon centuries, indeed for millennia, on the eve of Zionist immigration, they want you to think that these people were just Arabs, or maybe they were just Muslims and Christians, or maybe they were actually, maybe they were Southern Syrians, right? They're trying to sever the connection that Palestinians have to Palestine as a way to justify Jewish domination in Palestine. And so it's rhetoric used to undermine the Palestinians' connection to Palestine, but it's of course completely disconnected from reality. Palestinians have been calling the place Palestine for centuries, indeed for millennia, and that's what I write about in the dissertation.
So you're not in favor of this, and I always call it a brilliant slogan, because it is a land without people for a people without land. And let me just qualify this. As a behavior analyst and linguist, I say it's a brilliant slogan because it's so effective. It's an intergenerational slogan. That doesn't mean I approve it or I support it, but as a slogan itself, it's a brilliant one. So there are people using this slogan still today, and they really mean it. That land was that was an empty land. They came and made the desert bloom. Ursula von der Leyen.
There were a number of Zionist leaders that believed that, and that's why they actually embraced Zionism. They believed that the land was empty, and then when they showed up to Palestine, they were rudely awoken because they discovered actually Palestine was not empty. It had, on the eve of Zionist immigration, some 500,000 inhabitants who mostly 80% of whom were farmers and made a living tilling the soil and reaping the harvest and cultivating the land. This was, and so if anything, you could say that it's not that the land was empty. It's that the land was not only populated, but the people who lived in it were tied to the land. Their livelihoods were dependent on the land itself. So it's an insidious lie that was perpetrated again for the purpose of building buy-in in Europe for the Zionist enterprise.
So if you say the invention of Palestine, you mean, or I should ask, who invented Palestine?
Well, the word Palestine dates to the ancient world. It appears in Greek sources, it appears in Roman sources, Byzantine sources. The Arabs adopt the Byzantine usage of Palestine. The Crusaders do not use the term Palestine when they conquer Palestine in the 11th century. The Ayyubids, led by Salah ad-Din, take over Palestine from the Crusaders. The Ayyubids do not use the term Palestine at the administrative level, neither do the Mamluks or Ottomans. However, the term Palestine persists at the local level. People in the city of Ramleh, that is to say, what is the city in today, central Israel, they continue to call the place Palestine more or less continuously, as far as I can tell, for the past millennia, as do scholars and writers who are referencing texts of the tradition. They are reading the early text written in the early Islamic period, whence the term was used at the administrative and political level. And thus, if you open a geography book written in the 14th century, or if you open a history book written in the 12th century Middle East, or if you open a book of the marriage literature, the Fada'il literature in the 17th or 18th century Middle East, right? Any of these genres of literature, you'll find the word Palestine referenced, like I said, more or less in a continuous basis over the past 1,300 years in the Arab Middle East, among both Muslims as well as Christians. So the term has had a lot of cultural currency in the Arab Middle East, like I said, more or less continuously for the past 1,300 years.
Before we digress and dive deeper in the issue, I saw that you're also the founder of Palestine Nexus. Can you tell us what this organization does?
Palestine Nexus is an organization I founded about 5 years ago with the goal of making resources more accessible for the study of Palestinian history. And so we have maps. We have about, 1,000, 2,000 maps, antique maps, rare maps, digitized and accessible to anyone. We have about 40,000, perhaps as many as 50,000 documents related to the history of Palestine and the Middle East. These are collections of documents that have been donated to the archive by researchers around the world. These are also documents as well as manuscripts, newspapers, archival records that we've been able to digitize and make available to anyone, including a collection of about 700 documents from Gaza that we were able to obtain just shortly before October 7th, 2023, from Gaza's primary antique dealer, Salim al-Ra'is. So it began as an archive, and it has evolved. Today, we also have a newsletter. We write an article every week on trying to provide historical context for the present moment in Palestine. That is our focus. We also publish pieces by Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in the West Bank. We're trying to, again, provide a source of news and analysis about Palestine with a focus on trying to understand how history is relevant today. Myself being a historian, that's my main interest, that's my focus. And we also have a series of courses. You can take a course on kind of a 4-part lecture series on the history of the Israel-Palestine question. We have a 4-part lecture series on the history of Zionism. And if you'll allow me to just plug our upcoming course, we have in just a couple of weeks, just less than 2 weeks, we're launching a course on the history of the Palestinians. And we have a number of brilliant guests that we will be interviewing for this course. So you can check all of those courses out and all of the articles that we publish, as well as all the documents and the maps. All of that can be found at PalestineNexus.com.
I will provide the link in the description below. Yeah. One last thing. I saw you're also affiliated with the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking. So what are you doing with them?
Yeah, so I taught a course there last spring. It's an institute based in Paris. I would encourage anyone who is based in Paris to check it out. They offer courses in person on a wide range of topics. It's not dedicated to the Middle East at all. It's actually, they cover many different topics. But I think the idea with the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking is to make academic research accessible, again, to broader audiences. They're appealing to anyone and everyone. You don't have to be an academic or a PhD student to enroll in their courses. So check them out as well. I would highly recommend any course offered by PICT.
Keyword historian. So there is a small brand of so-called new historian. I'm sure you know them. One of which is Benny Morris. The second one is Avi Schleim. I have interviewed both of them, and I'm now discussing an interview with Professor Ilan Pape. So when you said archive, so these three gentlemen, the one or two others, they had in their 80s access. I mean, I know you know that, yeah, but they had access to the Israeli States Archive, then they published, then Israel was pretty much not amused. They closed their archives again till today. There's hardly anyone who has access to it. So I was wondering, where is your documentation coming from?
So you're asking about my PhD dissertation?
No. You mentioned your organization has also an archive with 50,000 documents. Yeah? So I was wondering, by any chance, are there kind of any documents also from the Israeli States Archive, or this kind of hidden information that's so deeply buried?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if we have any documents from the Central Zionist Archives or the Israel State Archives. Those would be the two largest archival collections in Israel today. There are also important military archives. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, has an important archive. But to the best of my knowledge, we haven't made available any documents from any of those archives. Not because we don't want to. It's just because we haven't done that. I don't have access to them. We haven't digitized them. But that's a great area of opportunity for us to focus on. I would love to do that because, as you correctly pointed out, after Benny Morris published The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, first in 1988, I believe, and then he republished it in 2004, there has been a project undertaken by the Israeli government over the past decade and a half to reclassify documents that had previously been declassified. This has been exposed by historian Shai Chaskani, professor of Israel and Jewish Studies, I believe at University of Maryland, if I'm not wrong. He has written extensively about this in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, and he has documented his attempts to go and find the documents cited by Benny Morris, Ilan Pape, all the historians you just mentioned. But lo and behold, he's told over and over again that those documents are classified, even though they're cited by Benny Morris, Ilan Pape, and others. So it's part of Israel's attempt to conceal what it does, what it has done as well. Conceal the ethnic cleansing operations and the massacres carried out in 48, conceal the ethnic cleansing operations and the massacres carried out in 67, in 68, and 71. Israel does not want the world to know what it has been doing to Palestinians for the past 77 years.
I've interviewed two survivors of the massacre in Tantura in 1948, one in Germany, one in Amman. I have not published it yet, but I have unbelievable testimony. One was a woman, the other was a man, so I have the whole story from both angles because the Israelis did different things to male and female. It's just unbelievable. So for me, the illusion from time heals all wounds is gone. Yeah, they are both over the 90s. It was a really, really emotional affair also for me. Yeah. So coming back to the archives, that's why I'm so interested, because many people they know, there was something 1948. There were 750,000 Palestinians expelled, more than between 400 and 500 villages were completely destroyed. Then we have this brief, and I come back to you in a moment. Yeah, we have this connection between Deir Yassim and Tantura, because in Deir Yassim, the people believed, the Israeli army said, if you don't fight, we don't do anything. So Deir Yassim did not fight. They were massacred anyway. And then the Israeli army came to Tantura and they knew what happened in Deir Yassim. And with the 7 antique rifles, they defended themselves against an army that was trained and skilled coming out of the Second World War, which overrolled them basically. And then they were massacred too, with mass graves. I have some details that I can share privately. Yeah. Wow. So that's why I'm interested in, archives and the documentation, because I have, historical testimony myself.
Yeah. At this point, I don't think very many serious historians would dispute the Tantura massacre. I think the evidence is by now overwhelming. You had a documentary that was produced by an Israeli Jew, I believe a Zionist.
Alan Schwartz, and this documentary was... Exactly. And this documentary was funded, to my knowledge, by the Israeli Ministry of Culture. How weird is that?
Well, perhaps the Israeli Ministry of Culture would not have funded the film had they known what the conclusions would be. But there was a master's thesis written about the Tantura massacres already in the early 2000s. It was the late 90s. A master's thesis that I believe was supervised by Ilan Pappé.
Exactly.
And perhaps you know more about this than me, but I think what resulted from that master's thesis was that Ilan Pappé was effectively pushed out of his position at the University of Haifa. And even though, again, because this was such a controversial topic of research, and my gosh, like, I can't believe you would publish the lies about Tantura, blah, 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 when, of course, as it later was revealed by this Ilan Schwartz character, as well as by, it sounds like you've interviewed people as well, but the evidence is, I think, at this point, overwhelming. We have testimonies from both the victims and the perpetrators. It's unequivocal, perhaps as well as forensic evidence of the mass graves. So I don't really think there's any debate anymore. There was clearly a massacre in Tantura.
Yeah, it's the details that I found really, really surprising. I will not go into them. Last word on Ilan Pappé. Ilan Pappé was indeed, let's say, disposed from the university. Then he sued and he won. They had to reinstate him, but then he got serious threats to his life and his family's life, and that's the reason why I actually left Israel and now is more or less living in the UK. And that's also the reason why I'm still in the context of Tantura. I would like to interview him because it's his fate, his life is so closely connected with that massacre there.
Yeah. Look, Benny Morris documents something like 20 or so massacres, perhaps more, maybe it's as many as 30, during the 1948 war. And in fact, he later came out with a statement, I think in the past few years, maybe it was a bit older than that, but he after he published his Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem in 88 and then republished it in 2004, he later came out with a statement to the effect of, there were many more massacres than I first realized. Because, again, the Zionist leadership in Palestine after 48 worked hard to hide the massacres, right? They did not want people to know about what happened. And so, this history has been buried for decades.
Talking about massacres, but then getting them into the present. And I like to make a well, I can say I like to, but I make a comparison between believe it or not, between Nazi Germany and current situation in Israel and Palestine. And one that really struck me is that the Israeli army, IDF, is recording and publishing their own war crimes live on Twitter, whatever. Yeah. Now the Germans did exactly the same, but differently. They documented everything because they were so convinced that they're gonna win. It never occurred to them that they might lose. Yeah. And some of them, based on the information that they themselves collected, were later hanged after the Nuremberg trials. Yeah. So I'm wondering, and I have asked this question to a number of people, and knowing we cannot answer this, yeah, but there is a potential that at least some of the Israelis that clearly film themselves committing war crimes might be convicted, and the first one in line is of course Netanyahu, who is already indicted by the ICC. But how realistic is that really?
Well, you're correct to point out that the primary, or the most, I would say, compelling evidence for these war crimes committed by Israeli soldiers is the videos uploaded by the Israeli soldiers themselves to all of the social platforms that are self-incriminating, right? They're uploading photos destroying civilian property during armed hostilities, which is a war crime. They are recording themselves firing indiscriminately at Palestinian homes, which is a war crime, and many, many other crimes. So it's certainly the case that if the ICC ever chooses to take up these cases, that they will obviously be using that video evidence. But, I mean, it's sort of what better evidence do you want than the perpetrator of the crimes themselves uploading incriminating evidence themselves to the social platforms? It's a confession, effectively. So you can't really get better evidence than that. Now the question is, will the ICC actually pursue these cases? Well, that's anyone's guess. Karim Khan, the prosecutor, the head ICC prosecutor, has been facing a tremendous amount of intimidation it's pretty clear it's being undertaken by the Israeli government, probably the Mossad, to intimidate him, harass him. We've seen what appear to be trumped up charges. Unclear exactly where these charges came from, but accusations of sexual misconduct. Even though we've had many reports, many very credible reports from individuals who have known him for years, basically saying, you're not going to find anything on this guy. He's totally clean. We've heard people say that know him quite well, and then we get these interesting allegations of sexual misconduct. But again, what does that have anything to do with his role as a prosecutor? It's obviously an attempt to blackmail him, to undermine him. And this has, by the way, been a long-standing practice of the Israeli government. I mean, just go back to the Goldstone report back in 2009, when after Israel's 2008-2009 campaign in Gaza, cast lead, resulted in 1,000 Palestinian, about 1,400 Palestinians were killed during that campaign. I believe the estimates are many hundreds of Palestinian children. The vast majority of those killed were civilians. In fact, in one report, a UN report, this is in the Goldstone report, they analyzed 11 strikes in which Israel, which resulted in civilian loss of life. And what they found was in 10 of the 11 strikes, there was no military target identified. And in other words, Israel was just indiscriminately slaughtering Palestinians, which led the Goldstone report to conclude that the goal of the campaign was, and now I'm using their exact words, to quote, terrorize and humiliate the civilian population of Gaza. This wasn't some indirect outcome of the campaign. No. The Goldstone report concluded this was the goal of the campaign, was to terrorize the civilian population of Gaza. And what happened after this 250-page report was published? Well, obviously this was a problem for Israel. It's unclear exactly what happened, but shortly after this report came out, or I can't recall exactly when Goldstone later came out, but he later just retracted the report. By the way, without consulting the UN, without consulting the other people that worked on the report. Right? He had a team. He didn't consult anyone. He just comes out with this public statement saying, I retract the report. Of course, he didn't retract any of the evidence in the report, but he retracted the report, which was very strange, very, very strange. And he basically disappeared. We never heard from him again. And he kind of fell off the face of the earth. It's very obvious what must have happened. He was obviously blackmailed. We don't know exactly what he was blackmailed with. Did a close member of his family, did he have a child or a spouse or a parent or a sibling? Did he have someone that was close to him that was compromising information that was presented to him about a family member? I mean, I would guess that's what happened. Because why would he retract the report? It makes no sense. So what I'm trying to say here is Israel has a long history of blackmailing and of intimidating ICC and ICJ officials, prosecutors, judges. We've known this for years. This is something we've known for decades. So, will the Israeli government try to blackmail Karim Khan? They've already clearly tried. Will they try to blackmail ICJ judges? Probably. They're probably already doing that. The Uganda judge who has actually been, I think, deposed from the court now, but Julia Septunde, I think is her name, the former chief judge, the head judge on the ICJ, the head judge of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, Septunde, wrote this, 50-page legal opinion on the case presented before the ICJ with regard to Israel's occupation, that in July 2024, she wrote this legal opinion, which was significantly plagiarized. About 32% of that opinion was plagiarized. This has been documented actually by Noam Finkelstein. I also documented this a few months ago. So, it's pretty remarkable to have the world's highest judge document 32% of a legal opinion. I mean, it's almost unbelievable. But here we are. So unclear who was feeding her that content. Was it handed to her by some Israel lobbying group? We don't know, but it's pretty clear Israel is meddling in the affairs of the ICC and the ICJ. So will that have an impact on whether or not Israeli soldiers are handed these, arrest warrants? Perhaps.
Talking about Israeli influence, but a bit more covert. So, and I don't know if you can comment at all, yeah? But this whole Epstein saga with Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell. So I don't know. I mean, we know that Robert Maxwell was involved in shady deals anyway, yeah, and he fell off his yacht and simply drowned. But what people don't really appreciate is Robert Maxwell sold worldwide intelligence devices, hardware, right, which had a backdoor for Israel to spy on all those countries that he sold those devices to. Then he came into financial difficulties, and if I can believe certain documentation, he tried to get money from the Mossad, and that's probably why he died. But that's not the point. The Epstein files that Trump, these folders that they recently showed, we have it, we publish it. Even if you watch what's written on the folders in the original video feed, there's something like version 1. Something like that, yeah. So in that folder, what they so publicly published, there's nothing in that wasn't already publicly available, right? So this massive espionage ring with the who is who on this Epstein Lolita Express, or how they call it, his airline there, from Clinton to I don't know who all, which still have not been published. They have the tapes themselves have kind of disappeared. This would be a massive field of research for a researcher or a historian.
Yeah, I haven't been following the details of the Epstein case closely, so I can't speak to really what evidence has been presented to support the argument that he is an Israeli asset. Although, what I can say is that Israel has a long history of espionage operations. We saw even just this past few weeks, we saw, I forget who came out with this reporting, was it Axios? But basically, the U.S. envoy, now we have new reporting, that Donald Trump chose this. He was a healthcare professional. I forget his name now. He got on CNN and did this interview where he said the United States is not an agent of Israel. And then, but he was carrying out direct talks with Hamas in Qatar. And obviously Israel has spies working in the U.S. administration, or has assets, or has allies. I don't know exactly what to call them. But clearly Israel got word of this. Even though these were obviously private talks, the United States probably didn't want Israel to know. It was negotiating behind Israel's back. But eventually, but somehow Israel got word of it. So again, Israel has its eyes and ears inside the United States government decision-making process, inside the room where the United States is deciding who to negotiate with, who to talk with. Israel has eyes and ears. So, Israeli espionage operations go back decades and decades. Just recall that after the Oslo process, right? What happened? This is 1993. Israel signs an accord with Yasser Arafat and the PLO, in which Israel is going to transfer over authority, some limited amount of autonomy, to urban areas of the West Bank, in which, in theory, now the Israeli military will withdraw and Palestinian security forces will take over. That's not what happened. That was what was supposed to happen. That's not what happened. Instead, what the Israeli army did was it massively expanded its Duvdevan unit. This is a unit in the Israeli army that is responsible for espionage, that is responsible for carrying out espionage operations. And so they massively expanded that unit already previously, in the late 80s, they expanded it. But then after 93, when they were no longer allowed to operate openly in urban centers in the West Bank and Gaza, what they needed to then do was operate covertly, which is why they met. And so you have these quotes coming from Israeli officials. There was one quote in the late 90s, another quote from the early 2000s, where they're admitting they're proud of it. For Israel, this is a point of national pride. They admit, the quotes are something to the effect of, we carry out espionage operations in the West Bank, not weekly, not monthly, but daily. In 2017, I believe there were something like 360 operations, distinct covert operations, and some of them are uncovered. And so you get, Israeli soldiers dressed in plain clothes entering Jenin, entering Ramallah, entering Nablus, carrying out operations. And if those operations are botched, it just results in mass murder. in order to save the Israeli spies, they just go on a killing rampage, which is, by the way, exactly what happened in Gaza in the Nusayrat refugee camp in June 2024 during a rescue operation in which Israeli soldiers dressed up as humanitarian workers and as Palestinian refugees entered the Nusayrat refugee camp. They were clearly discovered, and instead of saving they did manage to rescue 4 Israeli hostages. In the process, they killed 274 Palestinians. So Israel's espionage operations have been disastrous and deadly. They've also been illegal because you cannot feign status as a civilian during armed hostilities. So I've been rambling. This is a roundabout way of saying that Israel's espionage operations are impressive from the perspective of their ability to result in mass death.
There was another televised film by the cameras of the hospital where the Israelis did exactly what you just said. They were dressed up as Palestinians. They came with a civilian car. They went into the hospital and shot the people in the hospital. It was not so long ago. I saw it. It's
right.
filmed on the security cameras from the hospital.
That's exactly right. I believe there was an operation in Jenin. This hospital operation, was it? It was either December 2024 or January 2025. Yeah, this is commonplace. This happens all the time. And we don't always have the video footage to prove it, but in that case, we did.
If you look now a bit closer to home, I mean, time-wise, Trump inauguration, a ceasefire a day before his inauguration. Now, what struck me there was, of course, at the day of Ronald Reagan's inauguration, what happened? The Iranian hostages were released. Right.
Yeah.
So the day before the day before Donald Trump is inaugurated, we suddenly have this ceasefire. Now it's a tricky one because on one side, at first it appears because Trump sent his envoy Steve Whitlock on a Saturday to this. On a Saturday to make this happen, and it seems that Netanyahu and co, they were not really amused, but at the end they agreed to this ceasefire, and we can talk about that. Yeah, but it seems there was a deal made because in return for agreeing for this ceasefire, it appears that Netanyahu got free reign in the West Bank. And a implicit agreement that he could take up violence in the in Gaza at any time. Did you get any of those? Please.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that there was clearly a quid pro quo here, where Israel would agree to a ceasefire in exchange for free reign in the West Bank, as well as free reign to abandon the ceasefire whenever Israel so chooses it, right? Which is exactly what we've seen about 13 days ago. I believe the Israeli government announced a complete blockade, a return to its policy of total siege on Gaza, not allowing in a single truck of food or water, not allowing any fuel, not allowing any electricity. And according to the UN Special Envoy, who just came out with a statement 2 days ago, what we're witnessing in the past 12 days is the fastest hunger crisis, the fastest transformation of a population to starvation in human history. I mean, this is even faster than what we saw after October 7th, when Israel also imposed a total siege and completely locked down Gaza. Nothing could enter for a couple of weeks before the United States insisted and forced Israel to allow in humanitarian aid going back to October 2023. But here we have no insistence on the U.S. administration to allow in humanitarian aid. And what we're seeing now is every day, the Israeli army is killing 1, 2, 3 Palestinians. The average since the ceasefire began in was it mid-January? So now we're working on 2 months now since the quote-unquote ceasefire came into effect. Israel has killed, I believe, about 60 or so Palestinians. They're killing Palestinians every day in Gaza. It's primarily in Rafah. More Palestinians have been killed in Rafah, which is the southern Gaza Strip, than anywhere else. But they're also sending in these quadcopters and drones and sniping Palestinians whenever they want. I mean, can you imagine, if Palestinians killed 60 Israelis? in the past 2 months, this would be headline. Hamas breaks ceasefire, kills Israeli. The headline in Israel every single day, if one Israeli, civilian or soldier, was killed in the past 60 days, that would be the headline. Hamas violates ceasefire. But instead, what we're seeing is actually Israel violating the ceasefire every single day. A day does not go by without Israel having violated the ceasefire. And not just killing Palestinians, which you said they've already killed some 60 Palestinians or more, but also they haven't allowed in the mobile homes and the tents that they promised they would allow in. They haven't allowed in enough fuel. About 50% of the fuel that they said they would allow in has been allowed in. Barely any of the mobile homes. I think something like they agreed to allow in something like 60,000 mobile homes. I believe they've allowed in a few hundred. So less than 1% of the mobile homes they promised to allow in as part of this agreement have been allowed in. So Israel has violated virtually every single aspect of the agreement that it signed. There have been, I believe, more than 1,000 documented cases of Israeli violations of the ceasefire agreement. And now they've just thrown the agreement in the garbage with the total siege. So it's a policy of blatant starvation as a weapon of war. It's not even secretive. They're not even lying about the starvation policy as they were over the previous 16 months, where they claimed, we're letting in humanitarian aid, but they weren't. Now they're just open about it.
And now we have Trump propagating his Trump Gaza plan, the Riviera in the Middle East, right?
I don't even know what to say about these plans. They appear to be actually original ideas that were presented, I believe, by the Likud party. There's a slide deck circulating around that I believe dates to is an Israeli document that was produced in Israel by perhaps members of the Likud party, the party of the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, and it appears as if Trump is parroting some of these talking points. It also appears he has Jared Kushner's ear. And as you saw, already going all the way back to November 2023, Jared Kushner is talking about how Gaza has beautiful weather, what beautiful beachfront property. We just have a fair way of moving out the Palestinians, and then we can settle the Gaza Strip. Exactly who will settle it, it's not really clear who they have in mind. But yeah, it's just a. I mean, I don't even know what to say about this sort of pipe dream, turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. With it's horrifying. Could you imagine Donald Trump posting a video, turning basically calling for the depopulation of Jews in Israel? So let's send them all back to Europe, or we'll send them somewhere else. Maybe we'll send them to the United States. Or some other country, but let's turn Tel Aviv into an Arab Palestinian paradise. I mean, can you imagine Donald Trump retweeting a video in which Tel Aviv is now some Palestinian paradise? I mean, that's effectively what he did, but just in the reverse, where Gaza is now some American Jewish paradise. I mean, it's just insanity.
He said a couple of things. So first of all, he wanted to depopulate and move the population to Egypt and Gaza. Now, I probably have said this already on too many interviews. I was in Amman not so long ago. I interviewed 4 top diplomats, amongst which the former foreign minister, Dr. Maron Morsha, and all 4 told me the same thing. And that was last year, before Trump. They were concerned that exactly this happens, that Israel tries to push the population into Egypt and more specifically Jordan with a twist. And then once the Palestinian population in Jordan has increased, topple the Hashemite regime and make Jordan the Palestinian state. And then comes Trump Gaza. One more thing. On 6 days after October the 7th, there was a leaked document coming from Israel's Ministry of Intelligence, which does no longer exist, but it existed then. 6 days after, this document was published by The Cradle on October the 28th. I will link the document in the description of this interview, detailing a plan how to completely empty Gaza and the West Bank. The statement that struck me most was this rationalization, driving the Palestinians out would be less harmful to Israel's global image than killing them all. That's actually in this document in Hebrew. Yeah. So This is not a new story. Trump coming in and saying, let's push them all out. This 6 days after October the 7th. That means this was already prepared in detail. Which countries, where to, etc., etc. Please.
Well, the plan to depopulate Palestine, the plan to remove Palestinians from Palestine.
All of them. That's the point.
All of them. This plan goes all the way back to the 1920s. You had a few dozen different proposals that surfaced by people like Chaim Weizmann, by people like Joseph Weitz, by people like Ze'ev Jabotinsky, going all the way back to the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. The plan was executed out in 1948 when Israel expelled 750,000 Palestinians from their homes. From 1949 until 1959, Israel managed to push out another 30 to 40,000 Palestinians from inside the borders of the state of Israel. So these were Palestinian citizens of Israel that were pushed out through various methods, including force. So for example, 2,700 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from Al-Majdal, which later became Ashkelon, in 1950. As late as 1959, you had 400 Bedouin that were forced out to Jordan. And then from 1967, and then in 1967, Israel expelled 250,000 Palestinians from the West Bank. They expelled about 50,000 Palestinians from Gaza. From 1968 until 1993, Israel stripped about 250,000 Palestinians in the West Bank of their right to be an occupied Palestinian. Because they left for a period of time. When they left Palestine, that is to say they traveled abroad, they were working abroad, they were studying abroad, they had to leave their ID card at the border. And then if they didn't come back once a year to renew that ID, to renew their right to be abroad for another year, they would lose their ID. And so about 250,000 Palestinians were from West Bank were stripped of their right to be occupied Palestinians. Another 110,000 or so from Gaza were stripped of that right for the same reason. They left and weren't allowed back. Also during that period, from 1968 to 1993, Israel expelled about 38,000 Palestinians from the Gaza Strip in 1971. They expelled about 60,000 Palestinians from the Gaza Strip in 1968, 69, and 70. So there's been a long-standing Israeli policy to remove Palestinians from Palestine, not because they're a security threat, but because they have the wrong DNA. They don't have J-positive blood. They have P-positive blood. So they need to be removed. And of course, this policy continued after 2000 when Giora Island, the Israeli military official, proposed, after the failure at Camp David in 2000, he proposed establishing a Palestinian entity that would be demilitarized in North Sinai, in which all 1.5 million Palestinians living in Gaza at the time would be pushed out and forced to live in effectively a ghetto, even smaller than the Gaza ghetto. They would be living in some demilitarized tent campment in North Sinai. Of course, the Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak at the time rejected this plan outright. He reproposed the same, and this plan got reproposed over and over again over the past 25 years. Let's figure out a way of depopulating Gaza. It resurfaced again in 2009. It resurfaced again in the mid-2010s. And then, of course, as you correctly stated, shortly after, and that's why this idea of trying to push Palestinians out of Palestine, that's why this idea surfaced so quickly after October 7th, because it had been in the works for not years, but decades.
As far as you can tell, and again, I do not know how deep and how recent your research is, but I read somewhere that Trump is frustrated with Netanyahu's failure to finish Gaza. So as far as you can tell, what's the real relationship here between Netanyahu and Trump? I mean, we know that Trump is of course heavily financed by people like Miriam Edelson with hundreds of millions, and her late husband in the past with another couple of hundreds of. So this is not a small thing, yeah. But as far as you can tell, what's really his relation between Netanyahu and Trump?
Yeah, it's been a rocky relationship. Trump doesn't like to take orders from anybody. And Netanyahu loves to give orders to U.S. presidents. So there's some inherent amount of friction, I think, in that relationship, owing to Israel's desire to treat the United States as its little pet, and give orders to American presidents the same way Netanyahu would give orders to his defense minister or his foreign minister. So there clearly is some amount of friction there, and that's why when you saw that American official get up and say, we are not agents of Israel, why you have now reports coming out of the Israeli media, it hasn't been confirmed yet, but now you have reports that he's been sidelined. He's been assigned to some other file, or because you can't say that. You just can't say that. You can't say that because it's true. Because it's obvious that the United States government and Donald Trump himself do take orders from Israeli assets like Miriam Adelson, who donated about $100 million in the most recent presidential election campaign. And over the course of the past 2 decades, the Adelson family, that is Sheldon Adelson, who died a few years ago, and his wife Miriam Adelson, they donate on average about $100 million every campaign season, going all the way back to 2012. They've been donating $100 million every 2 years for a decade, right? It's not just the Adelsons, by the way. That you have many other very, very prominent donors on the Republican side who have been donating tens of millions of dollars every campaign season to the Republican Party. And now you have, so there's nothing new about this. You also have, the Jonathan Greenblatts of the world, who play a key role in pushing the Trump administration to
AIPAC. I think you need to clarify who he is. He's from AIPAC. Jonathan Greenblatt.
Jonathan Greenblatt is ADL, but then you have, of course, AIPAC, who also spent $100 million in the last campaign season, helping elect pro-apartheid and pro-genocide candidates to the U.S. Congress. They offered $20 million to both Nasser Beydoun as well as Hill Harper to run against Rashida Tlaib in the primary. Both of them rejected the blood money. However, they successfully unseated Jamal Bowman. They successfully unseated Cori Bush. The most pro-ceasefire Democrats in the U.S. Congress were unseated. Again, because they didn't support Israel's genocidal war on the Palestinians. Clearly the Israel lobby plays a huge role in U.S. politics. So does the EDL. So do these pro-Trump, pro-Israel billionaires like Miriam Adelson. It's a huge problem.
Jonathan Greenblatt, and I did a piece on this, was behind the drive to ban TikTok. That's an initiative coming from him. I have a whole piece about this.
It's insane that the pro-Israel lobby is the reason why perhaps the fastest growing app in the world, used by tens, if not hundreds of millions of Americans, is going to an app that millions. I don't know the number if it's hundreds of thousands or millions, but literally millions of Americans are somehow making a living from that app. I mean,
exactly.
You have Jonathan Greenblatt who's trying to strip the means of livelihood of millions of Americans so that Israel can murder Palestinian children in Gaza. That's literally what's happening. It's insane.
Yeah. When I wasn't aware. When I did my research into this ban, I figured out how many Americans actually live from TikTok because they're using this as a sales platform. Yeah.
What is the number? Do you know the number?
I had the number in my piece. I forgot it now, but it's a high number. Yeah. For a Chinese app.
Yeah, because you have to realize it's not even just people making money directly on the app. It's people using the app to monetize somewhere else. That is their top of the funnel. That is their marketing channel to monetize somewhere else. So you're stripping the livelihoods. You're kneecapping millions of Americans. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah. However, the CEO of TikTok was at the inauguration of Trump. And since this little spat occurred, I can say it from my own experience, I have now every single time your video is being reviewed, and I have a fraction of the views that I had before that. So something changed. I know from personal experience, something changed in the background of TikTok. Same as it did before on Twitter, where I'm now officially kicked out of. Yeah.
What happened to you on Twitter?
I got a message last Monday. I got a message, a nice message, that my Twitter account has been permanently suspended due to violations to authenticity. And then I looked up yes, exactly. So, and then I looked up what it actually means. It's you spam, you pretend you be someone who you are not, etc. Whilst all I do is I'm publishing shorts of interviews like these. That's what I published on Twitter, right? So I can still watch, I can still access Twitter, but all my contacts and of course all my subscribers are gone. Yeah, I cannot post, I cannot like, I cannot do anything. I can only watch. Yeah. So that's where decentralized social media comes in. We need decentralized social media.
100%.
Right? Because anytime this can happen on YouTube, this can happen to anyone. Even, I interviewed Professor Glenn Dees, and you don't know him, but he's a Russia specialist. He was deplatformed from YouTube, and only thanks to people like Jeffrey Sachs and others, his account was then reinstated. I don't have those kind of connections, yeah. So it's
it's very scary.
Yeah. Are you on social media?
I'm quite active on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm active on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Did you experience what's shadow banning? Did you experience that?
So I have had an Instagram post taken down by Meta.
Okay.
It was a post titled "A History of Peace Talks Between Israel and Hamas." One would think that, if there was ever some kind of need for more content on these platforms, it would be trying to understand the history of peace talks, right? Like that's going to help us reach a peace agreement. Yeah. But that post was removed for violations that were not clarified at all. I have had individuals report ex posts of mine, and obviously I challenged those reports that I was in violation of X's terms of service, which I obviously was not, because I don't violate the terms of service. And those flags were after I challenged these attempts to deplatform me. I was my posts were reinstated, so they've always failed to deplatform me. But that could obviously change at any time. Obviously, my content is, according to the United States federal government, and according to Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State, individuals who undermine U.S. foreign policy goals can be stripped of their residency status in the United States. This is what just happened to Mahmoud Khalil,
Exactly.
a permanent a green card holder, permanent resident, whose wife is 8 months pregnant. He was detained. He was abducted for political speech. Political speech which did not violate any U.S. laws. He was not. There's still to this day, as far as I'm aware, not a single shred of evidence linking him to any kind of even pro-Hamas activity at all, let alone providing material support to a terrorist organization. So there's zero evidence that he even supported Hamas in any way at all. But even if he did, there's a high standard of evidence that you would need to show to determine that he provided material support to a terrorist organization. So he's not accused of that. There's no evidence that he even said anything pro-Hamas at all. Why is he being abducted? Why was he detained and arrested and put in a prison? Well, because he violated, Marco Rubio is making use of a 1952 Nationality and Immigration Act, a law that provided a stipulation in which the Secretary of State could strip a permanent resident, residency status for, I forget the exact wording now, but it's something to the effect of, undermining or contradicting U.S. foreign policy goals. Well, guess what? I'm very hostile to U.S. foreign policy goals. Are they going to come after me next?
Professor David Miller, I don't know if you know him, from the UK. Professor David Miller from the University of Bristol. He was sacked from the university. He sued them and won. So he won a landmark case in the UK, which, how shall I say this? They confirmed that you cannot conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Of course, they go into appeal, but this was quite. I interviewed him actually discussing this topic. I didn't follow up. I don't think he's still working on because stifling dissent. Another person. Do you know Mikko Pellet? I guess.
I do. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so I interviewed him just a couple of days ago, and I also interviewed his sister, because Nurit Pellet-Helnan, she did research in regards to racism in Israeli schools. She too she phrased it differently. So I think she left but after a huge, because she didn't want to take it anymore. Anyway, the details are in the interview. Actually, I interviewed her twice. Miko Pellet, I have now the third time on. So there is a global concerted effort in countries like Germany. I mean, come on. Francesca Albanese was in Germany. Yeah, they did what they could to prevent her from speaking. Yeah, so this is not localized in the UK or in the US. It's in the Western media bubble. In the Western sphere, when you propagate a narrative that goes against the mainstream, you are at risk. Seriously, it's a risk. Your job, your being deplatformed. If you look at Canada, the strikes, that they froze the bank accounts from,
the truckers.
I mean, this is the direction we all go.
It's a very scary time we're living in. I cannot recall, certainly in my life, and I imagine this would be the case even for people older than me, Gen X, you have to go back to the Red Scare period in the United States when people were labeled communists, they were fired from their jobs, they were, in some cases, even stripped of their residency status because they had the wrong political opinions. And this is, I think, one of the things us Americans cherish about the United States is that it's the freest place in the world to express political speech. Where in the world do you have greater protections under the law than the United States to say what you want, to express political ideas? And here we are in 2025, the president who ran on a campaign of free speech, who viciously attacked the social platforms for deplatforming him, for his speech, is now undergoing and pursuing the most anti-free speech platform in probably 60 years of American history. It's a shock.
I found it a huge irony. J.D. Vance, I think 2-3 weeks ago, he was in Munich blasting Europe, for violating free speech, blah, blah, blah. Whilst at the same time, we have this clown with his, I don't mean Trump, I mean the other clown, in the White House with his kids, banning left and right people who propagate a narrative that's not fitting their strategic goals. It's just really.
Yeah, I mean, look, Elon Musk is a person who claims to have purchased the Twitter platform for the purpose of guaranteeing free speech rights. And this is the same person now in bed with the most free speech president, perhaps in American history, who's detained and abducted a legal permanent resident on political speech grounds. I mean, it's insane.
And I interviewed Noam Chomsky, I think, I did it actually twice, but I think 2 years ago, that was a couple of days, in December, a couple of days before his 94th birthday. Incredible man, brilliant and sharp mind still. Yeah, I hope when we get this old, our minds will be as sharp as his. But he was already talking about the US walking into the direction of fascism.
Yeah.
What's your take?
Well, what characterizes fascist governments is the belief that you need to support the state. The state is always right. You need to love the state. Doesn't matter what the state does. You need to demonstrate loyalty to the state. So if the state wants to support a genocide, well, then it's your job to support the state and support genocide. And that's what we're seeing with Trump. It's you either agree with us or we will abduct you. Very scary time, and it's not just around Palestine, of course, right? It's on a whole wide range of issues. This idea of abducting and deporting unlawful residents as well, people who are the United States government and the United States economy is dependent on unlawful immigrants. Right, it's dependent on migrants who are undocumented. Our slaughterhouses, the people who pick our fruit and our vegetables, the people who chop up our meat. All these people are undocumented immigrants. I mean, the idea of deporting all these people and of demonizing them, They eat cats and dogs. You know, the demonization of immigrants in the United States is honestly one of the scariest things I can recall witnessing in my lifetime. I mean, because it really reminds me of the demonization of Jews in Europe that led to the Holocaust. I mean, that's the only thing that's in my mind when I see Haitians demonized in Ohio. I think, my God, this is exactly what they did to Jews in Germany. It's exactly the same thing. And here we have it in the United States, the total and utter demonization of immigrants, the total and utter demonization of Palestinians. You saw Donald Trump use the word Palestinian as a slur. He said, Chuck Schumer, you're not Jewish anymore, you're a Palestinian. As an insult, as a slur. You know? I mean, that's what they did to Jews. You know, the word Jew used to be a slur. You got Jewed. Okay? I hope we're not going to get demonetized. I'm saying that as an example of what racist bigots used to call Jews, and now they're using that term. They're doing something similar with Palestinians. I mean, it's a very, very scary time to be living.
If you pull this back to Palestine, and I think it was Professor Omar Bartov who said it to me, but I'm not entirely sure. I have more than 100 interviews now, yeah. But I think it was Professor Omar Bartov. He said there is a line in the direction genocide. It starts with dehumanization. You need that. Next step is ethnic cleansing, and if you can't get rid of them, you kill them. Yeah, and he said that we are on this. Also, Israel is on that trajectory of full-scale genocide, and I'm hesitant to use the term genocide, because if you do, you're immediately in semantics. What is genocide? Does it happen in Israel? Blah blah blah. The point is that there is mass killing going on. I spoke with someone informally, and this person told me that it could be between 100 and 200,000 dead in Gaza alone. If you count all the deaths under the rubble in this moonscape, if you count all the deaths that are basically evaporated through this massive bombardment, it's the equivalent of 3 Hiroshima atomic bombs that have been thrown onto this little 42 kilometers by, I don't know, what is it, 42 times whatever, 15 or so. It's shorter than a marathon. So Gaza, you know, people have to. It's shorter than a marathon. This little strip, and we threw the equivalent of 3 Hiroshima nuclear bombs on this area. Yeah.
Well, the official death count, I believe, shortly before the ceasefire, was 48,000 or so, and then it took just a few weeks for that death count to jump to 61,000. In just a few weeks, they uncovered literally 13,000 bodies under the rubble. And then you have estimates going all the way back to this past summer. There was a group of American health workers and medical professionals, I believe 99 of them, who entered Gaza in the past 16 months as physicians and medical professionals to provide care to people suffering from aerial bombardment, suffering from forced starvation, and they came out with a study where they said their estimate was about 118,000 killed already. That was this past summer. Then you had the Lancet estimate, which was, I believe, somewhere they estimate this is going much. I think it was April or May. I forget when that study first came out. But there was a Lancet article that expected the death toll to amount to 180,000, if I'm not wrong. And the deaths continue and the killing continues. So we don't, and we'll never know the true count because of the number of bodies vaporized. We just literally have no forensic evidence at all. Their bodies just disintegrated into ash. You know, how many of the, I mean, you're talking 2,000-pound drums, like you said, the equivalent of 3 nuclear bombs dropped in Gaza. I mean, how many people just disappeared into ash? I mean, how many people are just stuck under the rubble? Mass graves, they're uncovering mass graves every day in Gaza. And how many more people will die owing to the forced starvation, the use of starvation as a weapon of war? How many more people will die of hypothermia because Israel refuses to allow in structures and concrete and tents and mobile homes? How many more people will die from festering wounds because they refuse to allow in medical care? How many more people will die just from a simple cold or from a simple flu because they're famished and they're sick and they have communicable diseases, and when their body is famished and when your body is sick, you can easily die from a simple thing like a flu. So how many people will die from all of these secondary and second order causes? It's going to be hundreds of thousands. It's going to be hundreds upon hundreds of thousands.
when I see this moonscape, where all this, also virtually every single, as far as the eye can see, every single building has been bombed. I can't help to wonder how many people survived and died a very lonely and slow death because they knew there is nobody's gonna come to rescue them because nobody can do that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, every single airstrike results in countless individuals stuck under the rubble, just slowly dying from dehydration. I mean, and then we have the more accessible deaths. So I am looking now and then on my list of people that I've interviewed. Yeah, Dr. Mark Perlmutter. He's a American physician who was in Gaza. He was actually, I forgot the hospital that he was in, but he was in that hospital when it was attacked by Israel, also bombed by Israel. And he specifically talks about a whole string of the young kids being shot either here, or in the head. Also sniper shots. These are not accidental shots. So apparently Israel targets kids purposefully. Well, no one gets shot in the head twice by accident, I think was the most memorable quote from some of his interviews for me personally. But what Israel did was, when they occupied the Netzarim corridor, that strip of land dividing Gaza into north and south, they continually were expanding that buffer, that strip of land crossing Gaza, at first it started off with maybe a kilometer or two, and they increased it. I think by the eve of Israel's withdrawal from the Netzarim corridor, it was 7 or 8 kilometers wide. But basically they continued to expand that corridor, but without telling Palestinians. And so anyone who entered these, and it was not just that corridor, Israel also created basically a security zone on the outer strip of the Gaza strip. Again, a security zone. They were called kill zones. Anyone who entered those zones, no matter their age, you could be a 4-year-old Palestinian child wandering into these zones, you were shot immediately. Shoot to kill. Those were the orders. Anyone who walks into any of these zones, they could be little kids, it doesn't matter. You just shoot to kill them. And that was Israel's policy for 15 months. Just shoot to kill anyone in a zone that they're not supposed to be in. And where they were supposed to be and weren't supposed to be, that was constantly changing, so you had no idea. And then, in addition to that, they would just declare various zones, conflict zones, and anyone, and so when they invaded Khan Yunis was a no-go zone. When they invaded Rafah was a no-go zone. When they invaded Jabalia was a no-go zone. But it was not obvious or apparent to Palestinians where they were even allowed to go. And so Palestinians wandering into these kill zones, boom, a drone comes over, a quadcopter comes in, snipes them immediately, kills them immediately. How many Palestinians were just slaughtered, just indiscriminately slaughtered because they were in a place they weren't supposed to be in, without having been told they weren't supposed to be in there, without knowing they weren't supposed to be there, just slaughtered indefinitely, no warning shots, just murdered in cold blood.
Coming back to my little visit, I was there twice in Jordan. Yeah, so the one thing that I took with me, and that's a sentiment that I believe, without exception, was shared by the people that I was talking with. They said it's an absolute tragedy what is happening, and paradoxically, but it's a good thing that it does. Now you have to understand this. Yeah? They are expecting a change which is different from the change that America or Israel might expect, and they might be right. I have statistics next to me. So the older the population in Western countries, the more they support Israel. The younger the population, especially when they have access to TikTok, the less likely they are it's actually the other way around. The more they support Palestine, based on the images that are coming out there. So my question is to you: is there a global turning point? Is Israel losing the image war, or is Israel losing the narrative?
No question about that. There was a study that was just recently released where they tracked the percentage of U.S. Americans who, generally speaking, support Israel. And over the past 16 months, the line is just down and to the right. Israel's support in the United States has fallen off a cliff. You had a poll you had a CBS poll in June 2024, and I've posted about this many times, which found that 61% of U.S. American adults I believe they're polling people over the age of 18. So this is not even including young people who are going to obviously be even more supportive of an arms embargo on Israel. But 61% of U.S. adults supported an arms embargo on Israel. That percentage climbs to 77% among Democrats. 77% of Democrats support an arms embargo on Israel. I mean, that's recent data. We're talking just from this past summer. So I imagine that percentage is actually even higher now, given that the genocidal policies of the state of Israel have continued unabated. That's remarkable. We now have a political party in the United States whose base is not just pro-arms embargo, is overwhelmingly in support of completely shutting off the spigot of weapons sent to Israel. That's unprecedented in American history. Unprecedented in American history. So all we need is a Democratic politician to actually reflect the political views of the Democratic Party, and you'll see a complete 180. And then you just need that person to get elected by the general public, and you'll see a complete 180 in the United States' government's position towards Israel. So as you correctly pointed out, what we're seeing a sea shift in public opinion polls in the United States. This is obviously all the more so among young people for whom, Israel's a pariah state. This is the issue of Gen Z, right? 50 years ago or 40 years ago, it was Vietnam. Then it was South Africa. Today, it's Palestine. If you're a young person, if you're progressive, and you want to be a social justice activist, well, guess what? You're going to be out on the streets supporting Palestine. That is the issue of the day. Not because not because necessarily Israel is doing something worse to the Palestinians than what the RSF has done in Sudan, although it probably is worse, but because it's the United States government that is funding and supporting and arming the state doing it. It's a U.S.-Israeli genocide as much as it is an Israeli genocide. We are participants. So of course young people are going to be enraged by this.
If you briefly talk about media, and again, I don't know if you did some research in regards to media.
A bit. I'm obviously following closely the media and what different media outlets are saying and doing and about Israel-Palestine. Sure, yeah.
I mean, the actual role of the mainstream media in propagating this war.
Well, look, it's long been known that you do need public support if you want to pursue a given policy, right? This is just common sense. And so to the extent that the US media has parroted Israeli military claims, has regurgitated lies about 40 beheaded babies or about the mass rape hoax or any number of other lies that continue to be perpetrated to this day, then they are complicit in the genocide. And you saw even just yesterday or the day before Marco Rubio regurgitate the lie that Hamas on October 7th raped Israeli teenagers, for which there is to this day no forensic evidence, no audiovisual evidence, no photos, no videos. The best we have are testimonies of individuals who were hiding in a ditch or they thought they heard something, but all the testimonies, even the oral testimonies, have been debunked. They changed their story 3 or 4 times. This was the case with, I believe, Raz, what was his name? Raz Siegel? No, I'm forgetting the names. But and then even and so when you ask them, well, who was raped? Oh, they were all killed. But then they can't even identify a single body that was raped. There's no forensic evidence. So again, the mass rape hoax was used to manufacture consent for the mass murder of the Palestinian people of Gaza. And then you had even people like Sheryl Sandberg produce documentaries in which they show testimony from Palestinians who were almost certainly tortured in the process of obtaining that testimony. So apparently Sheryl Sandberg, former COO of Meta, believes that torture is a viable means of obtaining confessions. So apparently Sheryl Sandberg was pro-torture. By the way, Kamala Harris... Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. This was discussed in the Knesset, in the Israeli Knesset, to use torture as a structural means. Yeah, that was televised and discussed in the Knesset.
Right. There's a debate in Israel whether or not torture should be used to obtain confessions or as a punishment for political prisoners. That's debated in Israel.
this came after the televised mass rape of Palestinian detainees by the Israeli army. You know, I saw it a couple of times on various news channels. There were those soldiers. They tried to shield the view with the shields. And following this event, there was a discussion in the Knesset about applying the torture as a structural means.
That's exactly correct. The debate in Israel is whether or not torture should be used as a punishment for political prisoners, to political prisoners. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's insane that actually the people who were filmed, there was a video that surfaced from State Teiman torture facility in southern Israel, in which you had this gang rape of a Palestinian prisoner. That you had multiple Palestinian prisoners whose autopsies showed they were raped to death. So rape is being systematically used by Israeli security forces. Sexual violence is being systematically used by Israeli security services, as was documented in a 49-page report released by the UN yesterday. Okay, so systematically used. And where are the documentaries? Where are the Sheryl Sandberg documentaries? When we have audiovisual evidence, we have testimonies of literally hundreds of Palestinians who describe the rape in detail in reports published by B'Tselem, by El-Haq, by El-Damir. There's no debate. Then you have the Israelis themselves going on TV talking about how they're proud to have raped Palestinians. And yet where are the New York Times front page articles on Palestinians being raped by Israelis? Where are the Sheryl Sandberg documentaries documenting the Palestinians being raped by Israelis? There are none. It's a travesty.
If we can round up this discussion briefly with the hostages, the Israeli hostages that were taken. So first of all, we have a number of hostages who appeared to be, how shall I say this, friendly with their captors. Yeah, they said they were treated very well. So there are two elements to this. Yeah, on one side we have a number of hostages which clearly kind of had the bond with the captors.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have this Hannibal doctrine, which maybe you explain.
Yeah. So on October 7th, Hamas militants entered Israel with the goal of capturing as many Israeli soldiers as possible. It appears there were also many civilians that were captured as well. It's not obvious that was a target, but they were clearly perfectly happy to capture civilians, although it's unclear which factions captured the civilians. Perhaps it was some of the other factions rather than Hamas that took civilians as hostage, which is of course a war crime. But during this affair, in which the Israeli Southern Command had basically lost complete control there were dozens of places on the Israel-Gaza border where there were breaches. Israel lost its eyes and ears. They had no idea what was going on. And thus, the Israeli government, Yoav Gallant himself, issued orders to carry out what Israel calls a Hannibal directive. That is to say, given there were all of these Israelis being captured and taken as prisoners of war and hostages in Gaza, there was a worry that these prisoners of war and hostages would be used as leverage to release Palestinian prisoners of war. And for Israel, this is a red line. And so they have a directive, which they call the Hannibal directive, which means better to kill the hostages rather than let them be taken captive. And so in at least 6 separate locations, so we're talking at the Nova Music Festival, you had Apache helicopters just spraying bullets at anything and everything moving. You had in the kibbutzim in Be'eri and Re'im, as well as Kfar Aza, you had Israeli tanks rolling around, demolishing homes where there were Palestinian militants holding Israeli hostages. This was the case in Be'eri. This is how we found out about the whole affair in the first place. This surfaced already. We knew this since October 2023. So this has been known for 16 months. You had and the reason we know is because Israelis themselves talked about it. There was an Israeli woman whose name I forgot, who did an interview on Israeli radio going all the way back to October 2023, saying that there was this hostage situation in which Israeli military forces had arrived at Be'eri. They were aware of Hamas militants inside a home, and they just fired on the home and killed everyone inside the home. Yasmin Porath is the Israeli who talked about that in October 23. And then over the course of the past 15 months, we've gotten more testimonies, more reports. This is not even debated anymore. I mean, Yoav Gallant has come out and said, we issued the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. So this is not debated in Israel. In the United States, no one knows about it because CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, they don't report about this. They barely have said anything about the Hannibal Directive. And it's unclear if dozens or perhaps hundreds of Israelis were killed, not by Hamas on October 7th, but by Israeli forces. So that's the Hannibal Directive. You asked something else about the hostages. Now I forgot exactly the other part of that question.
The hostages, some of the hostages are clearly, again, they had
the conditions of the captivity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I heard that Israel tried to prevent those hostages when they are free to speak to the press because they give a too positive image from Hamas and the captors.
Well, let's just say, hostage taking is a war crime. Although it's not clear to me that grabbing Israeli soldiers who are themselves partaking in the illegal and murderous blockade and siege of Gaza. I believe taking prisoners of war, is allowed when Israel is imposing a blockade on Gaza, which is an act of war, according to both Israel and international law. So I believe capturing the soldiers would have been legal under the laws of war, but capturing the civilians is obviously a war crime. So again, I don't want to. I'm not going to stand up here and defend, that activity. But as you correctly pointed out, when these Israeli civilians were released, many of them talked about, eating the same food that their Palestinian captors ate, sharing meals with their Palestinian captors, living in homes above ground, being able to take showers regularly, being treated, again, relatively well. Certainly better than most Palestinians in Gaza were being treated, being displaced and living in tents and just exposed to the elements, being starved to death. So, and we saw the images. As you correctly pointed out, again, I don't want to read too much into those images because they were images that were taken under, of Palestinian, of those Israeli captives, basically being, held. When they were brought onto the stages, there was that one Israeli woman who kind of made that wink to a Palestinian. You saw that one. I don't want to read too much into those, but it's very clear based on their testimonies after they were released, when they're no longer feeling the threat or the fear that there would be retribution. But yeah, they came out and said we were actually treated pretty well. And I think what's obvious at this point is that if you compare the average Israeli under Hamas captivity to the average Palestinian under Israeli captivity, there's no debate. The average Israeli is treated dramatically better than the average Palestinian. This is just undeniable. When you look at the Palestinian prisoners being released, they're literally taken from the bus they're put directly in an ambulance and taken to the hospital. We saw Palestinians released missing limbs. We saw dozens of Palestinians who were literally handcuffed 24/7, both on their hands and their feet. And you had not one or two, but a few dozen Palestinians whose limbs, we're talking arms and legs, were severed, were amputated, owing to the treatment that they faced. They're being raped to death. Many dozens of Palestinians have been killed in Israeli captivity. I can't remember the number, if it's 40 or 50 or 60. We're talking dozens were killed in captivity. The conditions they face sexual assault, they face starvation conditions. They're all coming out extremely famished. Starvation, rape, torture. Dogs are sent on them. They're being handcuffed 24/7. It's night and day, actually. It's night and day, the conditions between the Palestinian and the Israeli captives, night and day.
To end this conversation on a positive note, and that's not me, I'm asking you, is there a silver lining somewhere in this whole saga?
Well, as we said, that the public opinion towards Israel-Palestine in the U.S. is changing. That's obviously a positive development. How could it not change after 16 months of genocide? So that's obviously a silver lining. We're seeing some amount of accountability finally for Israeli leaders and Israeli war criminals. That's obviously a silver lining. We are seeing not just some amount of accountability for the Israeli leaders perpetrating the genocide, but now you have actually civil society organizations like the Hind Rajab Foundation carrying out legal action against the Israeli soldiers.
You should explain what's the background of the Hind Rajab. Tell the story. I interviewed actually, it will come back to me, but there's a special story at the root of that foundation. Please tell.
Well, Hind Rajab was a Palestinian girl, she's 6 or 7, I can't remember her exact age, who was trapped in a car. She's calling the Palestinian Red Crescent, the equivalent, the Red Cross of Palestine, right? She's calling, and there's a voice recording of the call. Anyone can go and look it up and listen to it, and it's horrifying hearing this 6-year-old girl crying and screaming, begging for help. She was trapped in a car with her family, and her family members were slaughtered by the Israeli military, just gunned down. Hundreds and hundreds of bullets were found in the bodies of her family members.
From a tank. From a tank.
A tank is being firing shells on this Palestinian car, and it's very hot. And then a Palestinian ambulance goes and tries to rescue her. All the medics in the ambulance were slaughtered by the Israeli military, and eventually they killed Hind Rajab herself. And it was her story that led this organization, now known as the Hind Rajab Foundation, to name their organization after Hind, owing to the just absolute travesty of what happened to her. And this organization is now pursuing legal action against Israeli soldiers traveling abroad, Israeli soldiers who have themselves incriminated themselves, posting TikToks, committing war crimes. And the Hind Rajab Foundation is basically monitoring the individual Israeli soldiers who have files on, who they have documentation of war crimes carried out by these Israeli soldiers. And then these Israeli soldiers, they'll travel to Brazil, they'll travel to Italy, they'll travel to Cyprus, wherever they go, and they'll post about it. See, here's the crazy thing. This Hind Rajab Foundation would have nothing. They would have no ability to do anything if it weren't for the posts of the Israeli criminals themselves. It's all based on the public posts of these Israeli war criminals. And then they post, I'm going in Brazil. Hind Rajab Foundation goes to the Brazilian legal authorities and says, you have an individual who has carried out war crimes on your soil, and you are party to XYZ treaties, you are party to the Genocide Convention of 1948. It is your duty as party to those treaties to arrest these individuals. And then the Israeli government will secretly intervene and try and
rescue
operations to save their war criminals from prosecution. So it's there's finally accountability happening at the level of the individual soldier carrying out the war crime. And this is very, very important. This is very, very important, extremely important, because now Israeli soldiers are worried, and now they're worried about traveling. So there's real accountability happening for the first time certainly in my lifetime. So yes, there are some reasons to be optimistic.
On that note, Zach, I really appreciate your time. It was my pleasure talking to you. Maybe we can do this one more time somewhere in the future. Anytime. I wish you all the best, and stay vigilant, because you definitely have a target on your back.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to join. Happy to join anytime.
Thank you.
If you made it that far, congratulations! You are ahead of the pack. If this video resonated with you in any kind of form, don't just scroll away. Hit like, drop a comment, share it with someone who really needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe. It sounds like a small thing, and honestly, it probably is a small thing, but this is exactly how we can keep these conversations alive. And if you missed it at the beginning, my Twitter account has been permanently suspended. Not for spam, not for bots, but for being too critical, for questioning the wrong people and interests. And that's the game now. Step too far out of the lines and they erase you. So if you value independent voices, if you want to stay connected, Substack is the place to go. It's free, the link's right below, and I would really love to hear from you. Tell me how it's changing the way you see the world and its people. So thanks for watching, thanks for thinking, and remember, always look beyond the headlines.